You've got to remember also there are two sides to every application. This is part of what I was saying before in terms of the national interest. A lot of people focus on what's being acquired. You know, what are the Australian assets that will go into foreign hands? And that's perfectly part of the test. The other side of the test is we need to look at the acquirer. Who is acquiring these assets? So in some respects, ADM fell foul of who is the acquirer. A little bit unfair, you've got to say, with their history being brought up against them. But we must always remember two sides to the equation, which does make that national interest test need to be flexible. And one of the things, again, that lawyers really don't like and don't quite get in this space, it's not precedent-based. The mere fact that you approve something or reject something this week doesn't mean that next week the same deal is going to get the same outcome. One of the things I'm very fond of saying in the area is it's 70% policy, 20% law and 10% diplomacy. And that policy is fluid. And a lot of the reason it's fluid is not because of politicians, but because we take account of public sentiment. And it's long been the case, opening language to the foreign investment policy is we welcome foreign investment. But then also it talks about how that foreign investment is tempered by community concern. So, as a result of the decision, is GrainCorp a protected species? Possibly for the moment. It would depend on the buyer. I think if you had a clean skin entrant to the Australian market who suits the competition aspect, with a proposal even to break up the monopoly, you know, separate ports from silos or something like that, they may stand a much better chance of getting an approval. But for the moment, you know, there is still that sentiment around we don't want to lose the Australian control of GrainCorp. But there, when you get to that point, you need to ask yourself a question. Why is it listed in the first place? I think it's a whole separate presentation, I think, but just leave you with that thought that if we are going to have listed companies, and it even gets down to something like a Qantas, have that thought process that once you list it, it's for sale. And it's for sale offshore. So don't come crying later that some foreigners come and bought your shares. You know. Does the decision impact the government's open for business? Look, I don't think so. Our experience, remember we did some numbers when the Treasurer said the GrainCorp decision was the 131st decision since she was made Treasurer. We did 27 of those 131, so it's roughly our standard percentage, and all 27 sailed through without difficulty. Now, on either side of GrainCorp, you had the Saputo approval going into Warrnambool cheese and butter. Yeah. Shareholders in Warrnambool are walking 10 feet taller these days. You know, great deal for them. On the other side, you had the Yancoal approval where the Treasurer gave some relief to conditions. So sort of a strange thing with conditions that perhaps, again, ADM didn't quite fathom was that, yes, you'll get conditions now, but it is open to go back and discuss with the government impact of conditions if they are not working. And that's what Yancoal did. And they got across the line. And then, of course, the other one, large one, was State Grid getting interest in SP AusNet. Again, foreign government to foreign government, Chinese taking over from a Singapore entity, or getting involved with a Singapore government entity. But it certainly has not adversely impacted the open for business. And we look at China, has the decision actually had any impact on Chinese investment? I think the answer to that is most definitely. Whilst the FIRB regime is not a prosecution-based regime, it certainly doesn't focus on prosecution. The actual intent is to protect the national interest and get to a mutual position where that can be achieved. It does help to have a large US head on a stick outside of the front door of Treasury, though. It particularly supports what we say to the Chinese. When we say to them, we do not discriminate. They've had a view now for some years that, for some reason, that we have some problem with the Chinese. It's not so much Chinese, it's foreign government ownership. And that's always been the case. It's not Treasurer Swan's 2008 guidelines. It's the policy back from 1975 that we've always wanted to know what foreign governments are doing in our country. There's no surprise in that. But you listen to some advisors and some of the naysayers about the regime that this is all some new difficulty. So overall, it is right to say we welcome foreign investment, and it is very rare to say that we have issues, and certainly not based on country of origin. The sensitive, as I said, is foreign governments in coming into the country. So what's next? We see in the Heffernan Committee the coalition position was outlined, and that what we are expecting Treasurer Hockey to bring in soon, in fact I'm surprised it's not in yet, is lower thresholds. Has to happen. I've actually been promoting a $0 threshold, but they're going to go with 15 million. When I got quoted in fact that would probably buy the wife's family farms, and probably do it, probably cover them actually. I got quoted in the Fin Review, literally, 15 million buys a hell of a lot of farms. So it's still high. But what they are bringing in, which is going to be intriguing, and see how it works, is once you've got $15 million of rural land, every dollar thereafter needs to be notified for approval. So in one sense I get my wish. It is a $0 threshold once you've got 15 mil. Now, it's going to pick up a whole range of people. So people like all the mining companies, they've got buffer zones around their mines, which a lot of them actually still use as rural business. Current time, if they pick up a farm within a noise and dust regulated purchase, they don't go to FIRB. It's rural land, less than 248. But now when we get down to this 15/0 cumulative, we're going to see a lot more work coming through. So employment in Canberra is going to increase. Agribusiness is also going to get a new threshold. Currently it's suggested to be at the 248, but there's also another trigger if you actually spend more than $53 million. Now I think they'll adjust the 53 because that actually matches what was then the developed commercial property threshold. So if you buy a building here in Sydney, it's $54 million at the moment. It indexed from 53 to 54. That may change. What we don't know is what is the definition of an agribusiness. Pretty clear, up to the farm gate, no problem, we all understand that. But the guy whose only business is to truck the grain from the farm gate to the silo, is he an agribusiness? We don't know that. So there's some thought process to be had around what is going to be caught by this new slightly lower threshold in the agri sector. So part of the reason I think for the delay is that there is still a lot of thought ongoing in Canberra about how to deal with that. The other thing, of course, that we know there is actually some bipartisan support, and that's for a register. Now, we don't, again, both sides have said, yes, we must have a register. The only thing I've gathered so far is that the definition of what is a foreign person will actually be used in the register. Now that's going to throw up some problems, particularly in a public perception perspective. A lot of people don't, everyone sees a foreign person as 100% owned offshore. The definition is single holder of 15% or more, or a multitude with 40% or more. That makes a foreign person. So there's a number of companies that you would regard as Australian, and the obvious one that's been there for a long time is Qantas. Qantas, for the purposes of the Foreign Acquisitions and Takeovers Act, is a foreign person. It's an Australian airline for the purposes of the Air Navigation Act, which has 51% Australian ownership. But there is an American shareholder at 15.4%. The last time I looked, that could have changed yesterday after their results. But last time I looked, they were at 15.4%, and that made them a foreign person. So what you'll see with this register is perhaps a shock to the system that will then have a very high number of foreign ownership that we hadn't seen before. I mean, the Labor government, when it put out its foreign investment policy adjunct, said, oh, you know, it's round about 1%. If you look at Australian Agricultural Company, Australia's second oldest continuously running company, it's a foreign person. you go to its website, it says we have 1.1% of Australia's landmass. So the government's own paper was wrong right from the start. But if you take those definitions that I'm using. So it's going to be a definitional exercise in how much flavour and sentiment you want to spin on that foreign ownership. So I'll leave it there.